The afternoon sun scorched the rusted zinc roof of the orphanage in Port Harcourt, casting long golden beams through the cracked windows onto the dusty floors. Inside, the children moved in quiet submission, sweeping hallways, scrubbing old pots, peeling cassava with dull blades, their small frames bent under the weight of routine, their voices silenced by years of discipline, but hidden behind a crumbling bookshelf in the corner of the storeroom. 11-year-old Malik sat hunched, his shirt soaked with sweat, knees dug into the dirt. In his hands was a tattered, coverless copy of Oliver Twist, the pages nearly falling apart, the text faded with time. His lips moved as he read, word by word, escaping the walls around him and slipping into the cold, cobbled streets of Victorian London. In that world, Malik wasn't an orphan. He wasn't forgotten. He was someone. The dream was short-lived. A rough hand snatched him by the ear and yanked him up like a dog caught stealing. "So this is where you hide," came the venomous growl. Uncle Femi, the orphanage headmaster, stood over him, his bulk blocking out the light. Sweat glistened on his brow, his breath stank of stale gin and pepper soup. Malik struggled, but the man's grip was iron. The rest of the children gathered quietly, drawn by the familiar tone of rage. Reading. Femi barked, holding up the book like it was filth, when others day work. "You think stories go feed you? Sweep the floors. Books are for people with futures." With a violent jerk, he tore the book in half. Then again, the fragile pages scattered like confetti, floating to the ground. Each one a tiny funeral for a piece of Malik's hope. The courtyard went still. The air grew heavy. Then came the whip. Femi's. Cain struck with fury once, twice. Again, Malik's small body twisted under the force, his back arching, his legs trembling. Gasps rose from the other children, but no one dared speak. The cane sang through the air, and still Malik said nothing. No scream, no cry, only the clench of his fists and the tightening of his jaw. Pain bloomed in red lines across his skin, but he bit down on it. He would not give Femi the satisfaction. "You will never be anything," Femi shouted, his voice cracking. "Nothing. Just like your poppy nameless, useless ghost." When it ended, Malik crumpled to the dirt. The world blurred, the corners of his vision darkened, but his eyes, those fierce, unblinking eyes, remained open. He didn't look at Femi, he looked past him, beyond this place, beyond the cracked walls and beatings, beyond the idea that this was all he would ever know. The children dispersed slowly, their heads bowed. Some looked back, pity in their eyes. Others simply walked faster, afraid they might be next. Malik lay still, blood mixing with the dust beneath him. His breathing was ragged, his hands trembled, but inside, something had shifted. Not broken. Uncle Femi hadn't beaten the desire out of him. He had ignited it. And though no one knew it yet, not even Malik himself, that beating wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning. At 5 years old, Malik's world ended with the screech of tires and the shattering of glass. One moment he was giggling in the back seat between his mother's soft hums and his father's off-key singing. The next, silence, smoke, blood, and then nothing. He woke up in a hospital bed to the news no child should ever hear. Both parents gone, no relatives came, no warm arms to carry him home. Just paperwork, a social worker with tired eyes, and a one-way ticket into the Nigerian orphanage. maze of forgotten addresses and broken promises. For years, he was passed like worn luggage from one overcrowded home to the next. Some were indifferent, some were cruel, all felt temporary. At age 9, he was transferred to the place that would shape and scar him the most, Femi's House of God for Lost Children. Asterisk on the surface. Femi's orphanage presented itself as a Christian refuge, but behind the church banners and prayer, Circles was a brutal machine built on fear. Children scrubbed floors until their fingers bled. They carried blocks, harvested cassava, fetched water in the burning sun, all under the guise of building character. Femi ruled with a leather belt and a Bible in hand, quoting scripture as he handed out punishment. There was no love, no comfort, just work, hunger, and silence. Asterisk Malik found escape where no one looked, in the discarded books left behind by volunteers or missionaries' dogged Bibles, worn-out magazines, children's readers from abroad. He stole them when no one was watching, hid them under mattresses, between broken floorboards, behind loose bricks. He couldn't explain it, but stories made something inside him feel less empty, less forgotten. He read anything he could find, encyclopedias, missing pages, torn romance novels, crumpled newspapers from 5 years ago. Words became his sanctuary. Asterisk at 12, he met Dare, a lanky teenager with sharp eyes and a quiet confidence. Dare had already been in Femi's prison for 6 years. He noticed Malik hoarding books and, one night, slipped a note under his bunk. "If you want to learn to write, meet me behind the shed after lights out." That night, and every night after, Dare taught him how to form letters, how to tell a story. But more than that, he introduced Malik to African writers Chemua Achebe, Buchi Makeda, Ngujwa Thiongo, authors who wrote about people who looked like him, who hurt like him, who fought back. Dare became more than a teacher. He became Malik's brother, his anchor. Asterisk then, at 16, Dare vanished. Rumors swirled he'd run away, been taken by the police, maybe worse. No one knew for sure. Femi said nothing. Malik was left alone. Again, but he never stopped writing. He kept every lesson, every story, every memory. He wrote in notebooks, on scraps of paper, even on the backs of old wrappers. Writing wasn't just rebellion, it was survival. Asterisk now. Malik is 22. He is aged out of the system, dumped into the world with nothing but a small plastic bag of belongings and a head full of dreams. He lives in Ajegunle, a dense, chaotic neighborhood on the edges of Lagos. In a cramped room he shares with 2 other men. The fan doesn't work. The walls are thin. The noise never stops. But on his corner of the wall, Malik has taped dozens of handwritten quotes, lines from the books he's read, passages from his own stories, dreams he refuses to bury. They whisper to him when the world gets too loud. Asterisk by night, he works at a printing press, folding pages, binding books, stacking shipments he can't afford to read. The shifts are long. The pay is barely enough to survive. But he shows up every day, grease on his fingers, sweat in his eyes. By day, he writes. He spends hours in cybercafes and roadside stalls, sending out short stories to magazines, publishers, websites, anyone who might listen. He's faced more than 200 rejections. Sometimes they don't even reply. Sometimes they say, "We don't." Publish. Stories like this. Once, someone told him, "Your writing is too Nigerian." Still, he writes. His stories aren't just fiction, they're pieces of himself. They are about orphaned boys who speak with fire in their bellies, about girls who fight their way out of silence, about systems that crush dreams and the children who dare to dream anyway. Malik doesn't just want to be published. He wants to build a world where kids like him, kids the world has tossed aside, can find themselves on the page. He wants his words to be the books he never had, to be someone's dare, to be someone's reason to believe. Asterisk, even when he goes to bed hungry, even when his phone screen is cracked and his inbox is empty, even when the rejections pile higher, then his stories Malik holds on to one thing, the belief that stories can change everything. And one day, someone will read his. He just has to last long enough to be heard. The message came without warning, simple, flat, emotionless. Dare is dead, suicide. He was working at a mechanic shop in Ibadan. Malik stared at his phone, unmoving, blinking as if the words would rearrange into something else. But they didn't. The noise of Lagos buzzed outside his window, vendors shouting, children laughing. The chaotic rhythm of city life, but inside Malik's room, there was only silence. Dare, the only person who had ever truly seen him. Gone, just like that. No goodbye, no warning, no reason. His chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out a piece of him and left the wound open to the air. Asterisk, by morning, Malik was on a crowded bus heading to Ibadan. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He didn't know what he was looking for. Closure, explanation, a grave to kneel by. What he found instead was a small auto shop behind a dusty row of shacks. A grizzled man with oil-stained hands greeted him and handed over a box. Dare told me if anything ever happened, I should give this to a boy named Malik, the man said quietly. You're him, right? Asterisk, back in his room that night, Malik opened the box with shaking hands. Inside were relics of a forgotten friendship, dog-eared notebooks filled with Malik's earliest stories. Drawings they had made under torchlight in the orphanage, faded pages that still smelled of dust and time. On top of it all was a single sheet of paper, folded once. Malik unfolded it and recognized Dare's handwriting immediately. You told me stories could save lives. I believed you, now go prove it. That was it, no long farewell. No bitterness, just belief. In Malik, in the words he had once scribbled in secret, in the boy who still dared to dream. Asterisk, Malik didn't cry, not right away. He read every page, every line of those childhood stories. Some were clumsy, others almost incoherent, but they pulsed with something real, something raw and alive. He saw himself in them. He saw Dare, and in that moment, the grief twisted into something else. A fire, a vow. He wouldn't let Dare's belief die in a dusty box. Not after everything they had survived. Asterisk, the next day, he pulled out the printed copy of his most polished manuscript. The Orphan Who Spoke to the Wind. It was the story of a boy who refused to be silenced, who carved hope out of nothing. It was the story Malik needed as a child, the one he believed others still needed now. He scraped together enough money to pay for printing and courier services, addressed the envelope carefully to one of Nigeria's most prestigious publishing houses in Victoria Island, and sent it off with trembling hope. Asterisk, 3 days later, curiosity gnawed at him. He wanted to know if they received it, if anyone had read even the first page. After his night shift at the printing press, he caught a Danfo bus to Victoria Island and walked the last few blocks to the high-rise office. He wasn't allowed past the reception desk, so he sat quietly in the lobby, clutching his backpack and staring at the marble floors. That's when he heard it. A young woman in a bright blouse stood near the receptionist's desk, holding his envelope, the same one he had paid to send. She laughed, loud and dismissive. "Another one of these street kids," she said, tossing it into a bin. "They think just because they suffer, they can write." "Please," the receptionist chuckled, shaking her head. "Nah, so. Everybody one be Chimamanda." Malik didn't say a word. He stood up, walked over calmly, and picked his envelope out of the trash. Neither of them stopped him. Neither of them looked twice. They had already decided what he was. He walked out of that glass building and back into the heat of the street. But something had shifted. He was done waiting. Done begging gatekeepers who would never open the door. That envelope had carried more than just pages. It had carried a life, a friendship, a promise. That night, back in Gunal, surrounded by the flickering light of a broken bulb and the humming noise of a restless neighborhood, Malik made his choice. If they wouldn't publish him, he'd do it himself. He didn't have money. He didn't have connections, but he had his words. He had a story, and he had Dare's voice echoing in his mind. He opened his notebook, tore out a blank page, and wrote Chapter 1. Malik sold his old phone, emptied what was left of his printing press paycheck, and still came up short. Printing 100 copies of his manuscript would cost 30,000 more than he had seen at once in months. He paced outside his friend Bode's small print shop in Yaba, heart pounding, rehearsing the words in his head like a prayer. When he finally stepped in and made the ask, Bode leaned back in his chair, sighed, and stared at the ceiling like the request had cracked something open in him. "You know I believe in you, Abby," Bode said, sliding open a drawer and pulling out a worn ledger, "but you better sell every copy." "I'm not Dangote." Malik nodded, breathless with gratitude, promising to pay him back in full. 3 days later, he stood outside CMS bus stop in the blistering heat, clutching a carton of books and trying to look confident. The orphan who spoke to the wind sat, in his hands sleek, stapled, and trembling with hope. The cover was simple, a boy standing in a field, face turned to the sky. It looked like nothing and everything. He tried selling it to anyone who would listen: commuters, rushing to work, students in uniforms, mothers with babies strapped to their backs. Some took the book politely, flipped a page or two, and handed it back. Others walked past without a glance. Some laughed in his face. "Storybook," they scoffed. "Nah, food we day find." Day after day, Malik dragged himself from one corner of Lagos to another banks during lunch breaks, school gates in the morning, bus parks in the evenings. He made just enough to eat one meal a day if he was lucky. He slept with the box of books beside his mattress, afraid someone might steal the little hope he had left. Once, in front of a bank in Ikaya, he approached a sharply dressed man, politely offered him a copy, and began to pitch the story. The man didn't even take it. He leaned in, his voice like venom. "You smell like poverty," he said. "No one wants poor people's stories." That night, Malik didn't eat. He didn't write. He just sat on the floor of his room, staring at the taped-up quotes on his wall, their edges curling with dust. He thought about Dare, about the promise, about the bin at the publishing house, about the way the man at the bank had looked at him like he was nothing. His dreams suddenly felt childish. The city didn't care. The people he wrote for didn't seem to care. What if he'd been wrong all along? What if stories couldn't save anyone, not even himself? As if to echo his doubts. A week later, he received a message from an old orphanage contact. Did you hear Femi's place burned down? No one hurt, just the building. Come see for yourself. Curious and uneasy. Malik traveled back to Port Harcourt, heart pounding as the bus rumbled past places he hadn't seen in years. The orphanage was now a charred skeleton, its roof collapsed, walls scorched. But Femi had moved on. He now ran a private Christian school just down the road, Femi Leadership Academy, with air-conditioned classrooms, whitewashed walls, and glossy banners that spoke of transformation and hope. Malik walked into the front office unannounced, dressed in his faded jeans and sweat-soaked shirt. Femi didn't recognize him at first. When he did, his face twisted not with guilt, but irritation. "Ah," he said, standing, the reader, still chasing fairy tales. Malik clenched his fists, but kept his voice steady. "You built this with money meant for orphans," he said, "while we starved, while you beat us." Femi laughed, sharp and cold. "That's how the world works, boy. Some of us learn to rise, others write useless books in bus parks." The words sliced deeper than the beatings ever had. Malik walked away, humiliated all over again. Femi had not changed. He had simply gotten richer. The system hadn't punished him. It had rewarded him. Malik boarded the bus back to Lagos with tears in his eyes, convinced for the first time that his story didn't matter. That maybe none of it ever had. He stopped selling for days. The books gathered dust in the corner. He slept through his printing press shifts, skipped meals, barely spoke. Hunger wrapped itself around him like a second skin. He didn't touch his notebook. The quotes on his wall felt like lies, no mocking, hollow, irrelevant. And then it came, an email. Subject line, "Thank you." Asterisk, he opened it on a borrowed phone, fingers trembling. The message was short, typed in lowercase letters, with spelling, errors and all. "Hi sir, I got your book at the BRT station. I read it in one day. I never cry before when reading anything. But your story made me feel like I wasn't alone. Like someone knows how hard it is. Thank you. I want to write to now." Malik. Read the message 5 times, each line soaking into him like water in dry soil. A young girl, someone he'd never met, someone who'd looked past his sweat and his broken sandals, had seen him, not just him, his story, his voice, and it had mattered. It had reached her. It had saved her. Maybe, in the same way stories had once saved him. He sat down and wept not out of defeat, but release. For the first time in weeks, the walls didn't feel like they were closing in. He wiped his face, picked up a pen, and wrote the girl back, "You are not alone. Keep writing. Our stories matter." That night, Malik opened a fresh notebook and began a new story. Not to sell, not to be praised, just to live. He wasn't rich, he wasn't respected. He was still broke, still tired, still hungry. But he had something most people didn't. Clarity. One person had felt less alone because he dared to speak. One spark had caught fire. That was enough for now. The world had tried to silence him, but he had written back. It started with a single tweet. A popular Nigerian book blogger, at their reading Lagosian, posted a photo of Malik's book, creased, dog-eared, clearly loved. Picked this from a hawker at Oberlin. Thought it would be nonsense. Instead, I cried in traffic. This story, raw, honest, unforgettable. Who is Malik Adedeo? The tweet caught fire. Within hours, hundreds were sharing the post, tagging friends, asking where they could buy it. Some posted quotes from the story. Others shared their own childhood wounds. It wasn't just a book anymore. It was a mirror. By the end of the day, Malik's name was trending. His inbox exploded. He couldn't keep up. Orders flooded in hundreds, then thousands. Bookstores called. Teachers messaged. Even a local TV station reached out for an interview. Malik had to beg Bode to take time off regular printing jobs just to keep up with the reprints. The same story that had once been laughed out of an office was now sitting on the reading lists of university students, book clubs, and Sunday school classrooms. One morning, as he stood outside his compound, sipping watery tea, a neighbor pointed at him and said, "Wait now, you write that Winboy book." It was the first time anyone had said his name with pride. A month later, he was invited to speak at a youth literacy forum in Abuja, expenses paid. The event was buzzing with writers, educators, and publishers from across the continent. Malik wore his only clean shirt, palms sweating as he stepped onto the stage. He told his story about growing up in a system that tried to silence him, about losing Dare, about selling books in heat and shame. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. People stood, some cried. After the event, a sharp-looking woman in glasses and a sleek blue dress approached him. Her smile was polite, professional. "Malik," she said, handing him a card. "My name is Amaka. I'm with Marla Books, West Africa Division. We love your voice, your vision. We want to fund your second book, nationwide release, even an international push." Malik's heart raced. Marla Books, global reach, resources he could only dream of. "What's the catch?" he asked. Amaka smiled wider. "Standard practice. We own the rights. We control editing, marketing, future adaptations. You'll get an advance and royalties, of course, but the story becomes ours." He didn't answer right away. That night in his hotel room, Malik paced for hours. The boy who once slept next to torn books under a leaking roof wanted to scream yes. But another voice echoed louder. "You told me stories could save lives. Go prove it." That story wasn't just his. It belonged to every orphan who had been overlooked, every child who had been beaten for dreaming. He couldn't sell it off. The next morning, he declined the offer. Instead, he called a meeting. He gathered everyone who had believed in him when the world hadn't. Bode from the print shop, Samia, poet who sold chapbooks from her backpack, Tunda, secondary school teacher with a shelf full of rejected manuscripts, and 3 other former orphans who wrote in WhatsApp groups by candlelight. They met under a mango tree behind Bode's shop. No boardroom, no PowerPoint, just hunger and hope. That day, Groundwords Publishing was born. It wasn't flashy. They started small, printing handmade pamphlets of short stories and poems from unknown voices. They recorded podcast readings using cheap mics and shared them on Facebook and Telegram. They taught storytelling workshops in public schools, recording the kids' tales and turning them into tiny zines. They sold e-books via Google Drive links. They had no office, no investor, just a shared belief that the stories of the forgotten deserved to be heard and owned by the people who lived them. Momentum grew fast. Bloggers began covering them. Teachers volunteered to distribute their work. Young writers across Nigeria began submitting stories. What started as survival became a movement. Within a year, Groundwords was nominated for Best Emerging Publisher in Africa. Malik received the email at 2 a.m. and sat in stunned silence for 5 full minutes. They were going to Johannesburg for the ceremony. Asterisk, the venue was Grand Lights. Cameras, champagne Malik didn't touch. Dressed in borrowed clothes and worn shoes, he stood alongside his small team, a lanyard with his name bouncing against his chest. They didn't win, but when the host read their name aloud as a finalist, the room erupted. Malik looked at his team. They were beaming. This was victory. And then the past walked in the crowd near the back. He saw a familiar figure, older, a bit thinner, wearing an ill-fitting suit. Uncle Femi. His eyes searched the room until they found Malik. He pushed his way forward, all smiles and outstretched arms, like a long-lost uncle come to bless a wedding. Malik froze. Asterisk, Malik, Femi exclaimed, grabbing his shoulder as if nothing had happened. Ah, my boy. I saw the news. Big things. I knew you had it in you. Malik stepped back. Femi chuckled nervously, lowering his voice. Look, things haven't been easy. That school, it collapsed after the fire. Donations stopped. I've been struggling. His voice turned syrupy. But I always knew you'd make something of yourself. Maybe we reconnect. Find ways to support each other, family. The word hit like a slap. Malik looked at him, not with anger, not even with pain, but with clarity. The man who once beat him bloody for reading now wanted to bask in the light of his success. The man who stole from children now begged for help. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to the stage, where a banner read our stories, our power. He looked at his team, at Simi, at Bode, at the empty chair they'd left in Dare's honor. He smiled, then he looked back at Femi, eyes steady. I already have a family, he said, and we don't need your blessings. Asterisk, and with that, he walked away. Asterisk, they met in a dusty, near-empty cafe, not far from the Port Harcourt waterfront, the kind of place where the tables rocked and the fans clicked endlessly overhead. Femi arrived wearing a faded blazer, trying to appear composed, though the weight of desperation hung on his shoulders like a wet coat. Malik sat already, his posture calm, composed, the quiet assurance of a man who had nothing left to prove. Femi grinned as he sat, all teeth and forced familiarity. Malik, he said warmly. Ah, my boy, you don't know how proud I am. I always knew you'd go far. Malik said nothing. Asterisk, Femi adjusted his chair, cleared his throat. Look, I won't waste time. I know things weren't always perfect, but I saw potential in you even back then. You were different, special, and now you're successful, respected. Maybe it's time to build something together. I've been thinking maybe a program, a scholarship, something we can put both our names on, you understand. For the children, his voice grew softer, almost fatherly. The world may see me one way, but you know my heart. You know I raised you. Asterisk, Malik finally spoke. You didn't raise me, you caged me. Asterisk, Femi's smile wavered, but he recovered quickly. We all made mistakes, but let's move forward. There's no need to dig up old things. We can help each other now. Asterisk, Malik reached into his bag and placed a white envelope on the table, sliding it slowly across. Femi hesitated, eyes narrowing. What's this? Asterisk. Malik looked him in the eye. An anonymous report. It's already been sent to the Ministry of Education and to every donor board you ever lied to. It details your beatings, your threats, The money that was meant for children used to build your personal empire. Femi's face dropped. The color draining. Malik stood, his voice low and steady. You killed kids' dreams and called it discipline. That ends now. Femi opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Malik didn't wait. He walked out of the cafe, sunlight hitting his face like a benediction. For the first time in years, he felt weightless. No more ghosts on his shoulders, no more silence choking his chest. Femi's power had always lived in fear, and Malik had finally stopped fearing him. 2 months later. Groundwoods opened its first reading center in Port Harcourt, just 2 streets from the ashes of the old orphanage. It was painted bright yellow and blue, with wide windows and a long mural that stretched across the front. Children holding books, their mouths wide in laughter, their eyes sparkling with possibility. Every weekend it filled with sound kids reading aloud, acting out stories, scribbling their own tales on colorful paper. Former orphans volunteered as mentors. Local teachers hosted workshops. Parents came to listen, sometimes in tears, as their children found voices they never knew they had. Malik watched it all unfold quietly, rarely standing at the front. He preferred the back benches, notebook in hand, soaking in the life blooming from words. One Saturday, he overheard a girl no older than 10 tell her friend, "When I grow up, I want to write stories that make people feel big inside." That night, Malik cried again, but this time it was joy. Not for recognition, not for revenge, but for impact. Real, rooted, rippling outward. When the invitation came from the Lagos International Book Fair, he almost didn't believe it. "We'd love to have you speak on the power of community storytelling," the email read. "Your work is changing how Africa sees its own voices." At the fair, Malik stepped onto a stage twice the size of the one in Abuja. Cameras flashed. Students shouted his name. Behind him, a screen read, "Our Stories, Our Power," featuring Malik Adedayo. He looked out at the sea of faces, some strangers, some supporters, all listening. He cleared his throat, heart full, voice sure. "I come from a place where stories were beaten out of children," he began, "where silence was survival. But today, I'm here because someone once told me that stories could save lives. And they did. They saved mine. Now, we save each other." And this time, the applause wasn't just noise, it was proof. He was free, and he had built something beautiful. The late afternoon sun poured through the wide windows of Malik's office, casting warm golden lines across the wooden floor. The room smelled of paper and ink, of stories waiting to be born. Shelves lined every wall stacked with books, pamphlets, and manuscripts, each one carrying a voice that had once been ignored. Malik sat behind his desk, not working, just breathing. In his hands was a weathered, taped-up notebook, the one Dare had kept safe all those years, filled with Malik's earliest, clumsiest stories. The pages were yellowed now, the edges curled, but the words still pulsed with a familiar fire. He turned the final page, then closed it slowly and rose. He walked to the nearest shelf, the one that held his own published books, now translated into 3 languages, made space. With a quiet reverence, he slid the old notebook between them. It didn't look like it belonged there. But Malik knew better. This was where the story began. This was the first brick in everything he'd built. A soft knock broke the silence. He turned. A small boy stood in the doorway, maybe 10 years old, holding a stack of handwritten pages bound with string. His fingers fidgeted nervously. His eyes were wide with hope. Asterisk, Uncle Malik, the boy said, barely above a whisper. Will you read mine? Asterisk Malik smiled, the kind of smile that came from deep, hard-earned joy. He reached out, voice gentle, steady, certain. Asterisk, of course. The boy grinned and stepped into the room, sunlight following him like a promise, and, as the door closed behind them, the room filled again with the quiet rustle of new dreams taking root.